Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I have the pleasure of hosting What Makes You Tick.
And I'm Richard Washington, founder of Tick Talent. We're delighted to sponsor this podcast, Tolu Podfather. Who do we have on this week?
This week's episode is with Meredith. What did you think of this week's episode?
So shall I tell you what my wife thought?
Oh, so yes, we should. Yes, we should. Let's do that. This is new. I like this.
So for those of you who don't know, this is a family business at Tick Talent, and my wife Gaia is the person who edits all of these podcasts. So she watched it earlier today and came away from it going, I absolutely love Meredith. She is just one of these incredibly confident people. She says what other people are afraid to say. And she's just an inspiring role model. I'm so happy that you had her on the podcast. And I was like, that's amazing. Then I spoke to Meredith and I was just energized. She's one of these battery type people, sunshine type people, like you, Tolu, who I came away from the call just feeling totally inspired by. And she's faced so much adversity. Not only was she a very successful individual contributor, but she got pretty much heavily stitched up by one of her previous companies, which would have
remain nameless.
A huge amount, exactly, nameless. It would have flattened most people, but it didn't. It inspired her to push harder. And then she's gone into the crazy world of startups, which we know is big bet, big reward, but a high chance of failure. So she's just got that kind of character. And if you could bottle the energy and put it into a cooling fridge full of Veuve Clicquot champagne,
that's foreshadowing in case you can't tell.
Yeah, exactly. You would build a world-class sales organization. So I'm not at all surprised to see that she's become a head of sales and that she's going to absolutely dominate in her career. Tolu, you had a wonderful conversation with her. What did you enjoy about it yourself?
I had two wonderful conversations with Meredith. So we did our pre-chat, and about 5 minutes in, I was like, she's epic. This is going to be great fun. And it was exactly that. So yeah, like I said, really tough story, but when you meet her, you wouldn't be able to tell, you know, like there's no smell of smoke. She's just like really, really happy, really charismatic. But at the same time, it's like, she knows how to get stuff done. And I love people like that.
Yeah.
So she's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we are probably the world's best hype men, but I don't think we can overhype.
But not for no reason. I don't hype people who aren't worthy of hype. So yeah, let's just say that.
So without further ado, fully hyped and ready to go, let us overwhelm you with the incredible person that is Meredith. Let's roll the VT.
Meredith, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
Me too. I'm really excited for your story and for your journey, and I know that people are going to get a lot from this. So the first question is, Meredith, what makes you tick?
What makes me tick? I hate to sound like a slimy, predictable sales leader, but let's call spade a spade. I am what I am, and I am money motivated, so money makes me tick.
Okay. Where do you think that comes from?
Where do I think that comes from? That's an even better question. So growing up, we were probably middle class. We grew up in a very affluent area, though. So there was a lot of money and wealth around us and well-educated people. However, my mom was very sick. And so my dad was the sole provider for our family. And so if I really think about my intrinsic motivation, growing up around that, I wanted to be able to put myself in a position where even if I got sick, which is probably, far-fetched and not likely to happen, but even if I were to be in that position, because it's what I grew up in and it's what I knew, that I wanted to be able to care for myself, provide for myself, and be able to take care of myself.
So growing up, we moved from Nigeria to England, and my parents had to start everything again. And so we were not even middle class. And I kind of remember, like, anytime people were like, what are you afraid of? It was always like being poor. That's probably the only thing in this world that ever used to scare me. So yeah, I really kind of resonate with that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
It's a real fear. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is. And was sales always what you wanted to go into to kind of make that come true, or how did you end up in sales?
I don't know if anyone ever really grows up thinking I want to be in sales.
Yeah.
Hopefully that changes in the world. I think people just fall into sales. I'm guessing a lot of your listeners probably fell into sales as well, but I was actually teaching English as a second language abroad in Spain for a few years. And this was right around 2013, 2014 when tech in the Bay Area started really blowing up. I'm from the Bay Area, and so I had friends calling me constantly saying, you've got to come back and get into tech. There's all these amazing jobs and all these cool things called startups, and they're kind of a gamble, but that's kind of the fun in it. And they're feeding us 3 meals a day, and it's glorious. And 3 meals a day
Yeah.
was a good hook to lead with for a young
Yeah.
professional just starting out in their journey. And I've always been pretty competitive in sports and athletics, and so it seemed like a natural good fit. So I said, okay, I'll try this sales thing. And I came back and started at a little company called Yelp. Perhaps some of your listeners have heard of it, at least in America. And they had a really great training program there. And so that's where I got my start.
And so you mentioned you were quite competitive. So like, what sports were you involved with, and what kind of level did you compete at?
I still play competitive field hockey. So I played field hockey in all the way through college, and I still play today at a very high level adult league. So there's a lot of that. Played tennis growing up, younger years, everything under the sun, basketball, soccer, running, you name it. In the United States, we have something called they're not organized sports, but on Thanksgiving, we have turkey trots. So a lot of cities will offer organized races. And the idea is you go and you burn off all the calories that you're then going to consume later in the day.
Okay.
And so I started winning those at a very young age. And they often gift you a full turkey or an apple pie or something
Right.
to go with the meal. So from a young age, I would win those. And then it became expected that I would go win dinner
Yeah.
for the family later. We would scour the internet and, okay, this city's offering apple pie, but this city's offering, half a turkey or a whole turkey. So, at 9 o'clock, you're going to do this one. At 11, you're going to try your hand at that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And how do you kind of bring some of that competitiveness into what you do in sales?
Well, I think sales is competitive by nature. A lot of competitive people and former athletes join just because it's a numbers game, right? So it's very easy to measure how you're performing against your peers, within your team, on different teams, but also you get to compete amongst yourself. And so I think that's really attractive to athletic or competitive people.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about kind of being a college athlete, and for people in England that don't know what a college athlete is like in America, like you train 4, 5, 6 hours a day depending on your school. You've got your games, so like it's a very intensive thing, and I think that's also like sales can be quite intensive. You've got to put in the work, you've got to grind it out sometimes. So yeah, that's why I was kind of interested in, okay, how does that kind of translate into what you're doing in sales, and how has that been able to make you successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like you mentioned, there is a lot of training in collegiate athletes and athletics that translates well into sales because, like you mentioned, you might be getting up at 6 a.m. for an early morning practice. Then you go and you do your classes, if you can get to all of them. Try to make it to all your classes. And then in the evening, you're either doing weight trainings or cardio, or maybe you have a second practice. And so it's that extreme discipline to get the practice reps in so that when it's game day, you perform at the highest level. And sales is very similar in that you're doing lots of repetitions, you're doing a lot of preparation for phone calls, you're, making your dials, getting rejected 100 times a day so that when you get on that big game day sales demo, you can perform at your highest level.
And what have been some of your kind of highest moments in sales?
Ooh, some of my highest moments. I have closed some notably very large deals at startups when our ACV was considerably lower. There was one sale in particular at a company that I was at called Spiff. They are now acquired by Salesforce. And so I like to think that this deal
Helps.
largely contributed to their
Yeah.
ability to move up market and go into enterprise. But at the time, the average ACV was only about 20K, and I was able to secure a deal that was $450,000, and I got
Wow.
it for 3 years up front. So it was a $1.5 million deal.
Wow.
Yes, it was very exciting. It was just under the company's total ARR the year before. So that felt really good.
I can imagine.
That one was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And what were some of the things that you think you did that helped to get that deal over the line?
Yes. I grew up with this saying just rings in my ears, still it just burns in my memory. And my grandparents used to say, you have 2 ears and one mouth, so you need to listen twice as much as you talk. You know how
Yeah.
grandparents and
Yeah.
they want their, trophy grandchildren to sit there and be quiet, and
Yeah.
that's how we were raised. You have 2 ears, so you need to listen twice as much as you talk. And so I think that I'm naturally a very active listener, and so I allow my clients the space to speak freely and speak at length about their problems, and then I come in with a solution. So I'm not asking them a question to then ask another question. A lot of times I've seen sales reps just go through the motion of checking boxes of, okay, I have this question and that question, and it feels like an interrogation,
Yeah.
and your client can feel it. So if you can really nail the skill of listening, but listening actively and listening to actually hear them and not to just respond, I think that is a monumental skill that is highly appreciated in sales, because the majority of salespeople are talking at your client. You're not talking with your client. So there's actually some great tools out there today and things that I've used to coach my reps are on things like talk ratio. So if anyone has a call recording system like Gong or SalesLoft or Clary, you can actually see the talk ratios. And there are studies out there that show that the winning ratios are more like 60% talking, 40% listening, 50-50. I always try to be 40% and have my client be 60. But then you can also see that there are reps that are talking 80% of the time, and that
Wow.
is just not going to fly. So I would encourage anyone listening to track your actual talk ratio.
I've never even thought of that as an actual thing that people can track. That's amazing. And I think that clients that feel heard, they are more likely to buy, right? Because they know that you understand what they want. They know that you actually care about them. So it just makes sense, but it's not something I'd have ever thought about, actually.
Absolutely.
So the podcast is probably the one place where you're a guest where actually like the 2-to-1 ratio doesn't really work. Like you're going to have to do a lot more of the talking.
Correct. Not in this realm. We won't look at our talk ratios here, but
Yeah.
it's more for actual.
I would love to see my talk ratios and see like how low can I actually get my talk ratios for an episode. That would actually be quite cool.
There you go.
So you mentioned coaching. When did you actually start leading people in your career?
I started leading people at a company called Samsara. So I was doing really well as a rep there, and it seemed like the next step in my career was management. As I mentioned at the top of the call, I was actually a teacher before I got into sales. So I was really excited to get back to teaching. I will admit I completely flubbed on my first management experience.
Okay.
It is really hard, and I see this happen today. It's really hard to go from rep to super rep, essentially, it's really hard to go from rep to manager, because the expectation is you're such a good rep, make everyone do what you do, right? And that is not the same set of skills as managing. And it's really hard when you've seen incredible success, which most managers have. That's why you're getting asked and promoted to be into management is to replicate and multiply what you've done. But it's really hard to go from doing things a certain way, knowing they work well, and being hands off and letting others do it their way and coaching. There's a huge miss right now, I think, in the market on teaching managers the skill sets of actually managing a team and coaching them. So I will admit, and I'm sorry to those first reps at Samsara that I had. I'm sorry for the mistakes that I made with you and on you. I had everyone's best interest in mind, but I also didn't get any training on how to become a manager. I see it time and time again. It still exists today. They just pluck reps, put them into management, don't give them any training on an entirely different skill set, and wish them luck.
When you look back at it, what were some of the mistakes that you made that if someone was becoming a first-time manager that you would be like, don't make these mistakes that I made?
Yes, I would first remind whoever is promoting you into management that it is also their responsibility to train you on these new skills. So if you think about if anyone listening went from a BDR to an AE, those are entirely different set of skills, right? It's very similar going to AE to management. So I would implore you to lean on that person promoting you as a resource and as a coach, and hopefully they can guide you through those skill transitions or give you some resources, books, courses on how to do that yourself. The other piece of advice I would give is most people learn by doing it themselves, right? You as a rep probably learned by mistakes, learnings, falling on your face, and it is an innate instinct as a manager to want to avoid that for your reps. So I see a lot of managers hop in on calls and they take over, and your rep doesn't really learn that way. And so it's best if you can be on the call and be that support system, but let your rep guide and be there only if they can call on you by name or if there's really a tap in moment, but don't just take over the call unnecessarily, because chances are your rep can handle it. It's not going to be exactly the way you would have done it, but that's fine. You're there to coach them and guide them and make them better through their own experiences.
That's really good advice. And what I'm wondering is, how did you go, because you've had quite a lot of kind of bigger roles and more leadership roles since that time, how did you grow and become a great leader in that time? Like, what were some of the things that were helpful for you?
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of trial and error. But I think also being more vulnerable and showing support immediately with your reps to build rapport. So in some situations, it also can be tricky because you go from being peers to then having to manage your peers. And so I think it's really important to learn with your reps or from your reps, hey, now that, I'm in a different position, we're still in this together, we're still a team. I want to learn more about you in this new relationship. So tell me what motivates you. And everyone's going to be motivated differently. And I cannot stress how important it is for managers to understand each rep's individual distinct motivation, because I might be money motivated. The person next to me might be gunning for a promotion. The person 3 seats down, maybe just does not want to be at home during the day, and they just want a safe space, and their poor soul has chosen sales as that safe space. And so it's really important to understand what motivates the reps so that you can help them work towards those goals, right? I once had a manager who would always dangle a promotion carrot in front of me. And at the time, I couldn't care less about title. I was making really good money. I just wanted to make more money. And so he really lost he lost credibility in my mind because he was dangling the wrong thing in front of me, saying the wrong thing constantly. I didn't feel like he understood me at all. And we were not working on the same path. And so I think one thing, and it's pretty simple, that managers can do is just understand, why are your direct reports here and how do you work together towards helping them achieve those goals?
That's really good. That's really good. And were there any leaders that kind of helped you along the way in growing as a leader?
Yes, there's a lot of leaders that helped me along the way. I had a very strong female leader, Ashley. Shout out Ashley. She was amazing. She was very supportive. We dealt with a lot of difficult customers there, and I probably came on too strong to a few customers, ruffled some feathers. She would always come in, mediate. She never, threw me under the bus. She was very supportive in what became a very tricky situation there. At Samsara, I had a wonderful, wonderful leader, Andy. Shout out Andy if you're listening. He was so fun. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes I don't want to say mistakes, but if I could do it over, I probably just would have stayed a rep under Andy for the rest of my life if I could, because I was so eager to, he calls it leave the nest. He was mama hen, and, he was like, I want to see you fly, but you've got a good thing here. And, I was that ignorant, kind of not ignorant, but stubborn, younger rep, really eager to make a name for myself. And no, Andy, I want management. But he was so fun. We had this thing at Samsara. They did an amazing job creating a winning culture. That's where I really learned how to motivate people and get people excited about work. So one of the things they did was, if you sold a deal over $100,000, you got a bottle of Veuve champagne. And I was doing, it was so cool. And they'd put the number of the dollars that was spent. You get a sticker. It'd be announced in front of the whole sales org. You would put it on your desk. And $100,000 deals were pretty hard to come by in that day. And I was doing so well, I had a few bottles piling up. And and they're kind of those trophies where you want to drink them, especially me. I love Veuve and I love high-end champagne, but then you don't want to, lose the trophy on your desk, because everyone walks by and they go, oh my gosh, you have 3, you have 4. I'm still trying to get my first one. Well, Andy was so cool. And again, I was a stubborn, annoying rep at this time. It's my first job, making a lot of money. And I bought myself a champagne fridge for work, specifically for
all my trophies.
And he not only let me keep it at my desk, that lovely man and my sweet colleague, Joe, shout out to Joe, they put it together for me and let me store it underneath my desk. And they put all the champagnes in there. I still have a video of it. I should really put it on my website, because it's really a lovely gesture. But shout out to Andy for being a fantastic leader as well.
Wow. That's so funny. That's so funny. And so you mentioned that there was a bit of a tricky situation. Would you mind sharing a bit more about that?
So yes, there was a tricky situation. So earlier in my career, I worked at a well-established company that you would think would have its commissions statements and rules squared away. I was doing really well there. And when you're doing well, as I'm sure many of your listeners are, you don't count the pennies, right? The money's coming in. It's a different amount each month. As we know in sales, this particular role had different quotas too. So it wasn't just one payout per month. It was multiple. And so it was really confusing to track what was going on. But again, the money was coming in. So as long as, I had money to pay my bills and a lot of funny money, I wasn't going to go back and dot the T's, cross the T's and dot the I's. However, one day this all came crashing down on me unexpectedly. HR pulled me into an office. They said, hey, can we talk to you for a few minutes? My first thought, Talu, is, oh my gosh, they read our G chats. Yes, this is before chat. For all your listeners, this is when there was just G chat. And I'm thinking, Big Brother is real. What did I say this week? My gosh. And unfortunately, that wasn't the issue. Going back, and I wish that's what had happened, but HR pulled me into a room and they said, Meredith, we have been overpaying you and we need that money back. And my initial reaction is, oh gosh, okay, $2,000, $3,000, that's gonna be, I'm gonna have to eat ramen the rest of this month, but I'm gonna do it and we're gonna
Yeah.
make it right.
Yeah.
However, they said, it's a little bit more than that. It's actually been since you started here, and it's accumulated to about $55,000 total. I
Wow.
said, $55,000, holy moly. How did I miss that?
Yeah.
And they said, you didn't do anything wrong because there's different amounts each month. And it wasn't like I got one lump sum of $55,000, right? It's an extra $1,238 one month and an extra $2,900 whatever the next month. Again, you're not tracking it when you're doing well. I was a top performer. And so what was interesting in that time is, in the state I was living at, even if you walk into a grocery store and the cash register gives you a 20 back instead of a 10, you are obligated by law to return it. And so I said, okay, I want to work with you on this. I have paid taxes on that money. I have invested that money. I'm going to take a huge hit if I try to move it all around for you on something that I didn't even do. Can we work on the money from this year? Like, let's, again, that's still a considerable chunk, but like, I'll work with you on that. They were so stuck on getting the whole amount. I couldn't believe it because I hadn't done anything wrong. I was a top producing rep. And I'm sitting there thinking, why are you not talking to accounting? How is your finance department not fired? And then I start thinking more logically. $50,000 for this company is kind of a drop in the bucket for the $1.5 million I'm bringing them per year. So if this doesn't work out, I'm going to have to leave, and that's going to be $1.5 million. And so it was a very unfortunate string of events that followed, because we were trying to find a way to give them back the money where, again, taxes had been paid. They were really fixated on the whole amount. It got messy after that, and it was not an enjoyable experience, which is why I ultimately had to leave.
How did you?
So the lesson for
Go ahead. No, you go. Sorry.
I was going to say, the lesson for any of your listeners is, even if you're doing well, even if the money is coming in, I would implore you to still check your commissions each quarter, each month, what have you, because you never know if they're going to ask for it back, which in many states, countries, that you are obligated to return.
And how did you pick yourself up after that?
That was a tough one. It was a very unique situation in that we were in a standstill, so they thought they could push me out, so they raised my quota. Your girl hit her quota, which means they had to pay me even more, which infuriated them. So at that point, Paulu, it was the weirdest thing ever. I've never heard of this. I haven't even seen this on a playground. Again, I was a teacher. I've never seen anything like this. They formed some sort of coup in the office, and they told people not to hang out with me so that I would be so miserable that I would leave on my own, because I was in this standstill getting advice of, you can't leave, and they can't fire you because it's retaliation, etc., etc. So we're in the standstill. No one will sit with me. No one will say hi to me at the coffee maker. It was a really sad time. Shout out to my boys Dallas and Rick, who to this day I'm still very grateful to. They were the only one of few people in that office with a backbone who would go to lunch with me every day, and who said, this situation does not affect our friendship or how we view her as a person or a seller. And I don't think I could have gotten through that time without them. So forever indebted to those two wonderful gentlemen and sales superstars. So how did I pick myself up, though? Gosh, that was a really rough time. And luckily I landed at my next gig, which was a Series A startup at the time. So they kept me more than busy. So I had very little time to wallow in my sorrows from the previous departure.
Yeah. Okay. And was that kind of the start of you working more with startups versus quite established companies?
Yes.
Okay. And what are some of the things that you've learned on your journey working with, because you've worked with quite a few startups now, right?
Yes, I have worked in a few startups. A few things. If we think about what's paid off, I think startups are always risky, right?
Mm, mm,
And risk might not be for everyone. It's very dependent on where you are in your life, right? Maybe you just got married or you're expecting a kid or you're saving up for a house. Some things and some points in your life you want more predictability, stability. I do not recommend startups for those people.
yeah.
I am very risk averse by
Okay.
design. I am a firm believer in you got to play big to win big.
Okay.
Hopefully crypto makes a turn sometime.
This has been a good week. It's been a good
Believe
week.
big, play big, or to
Yeah.
win or lose big. I should, asterisk that. But some things that pay off, I think, is just taking a chance. And so I think even if you have some of those more established things in life, like a significant other or child or mortgage to pay, things like that, I do believe everyone should take a chance once because it's going to
Mm,
pay off if not monetarily in learnings.
yeah.
So I just think there's so much going on in startups. You wear so many hats, you're expected to do and learn so much so quickly that I think everyone can afford 1 year of their life to really try something new. And some of these startups that I've been at, luckily, have paid off immensely in learnings, but they've also been very lucrative in actually paying
Mm,
off. And
mm,
so, the worst thing that happens is your equity doesn't equate to anything and you learn a ton. You're still getting paid at these
mm,
places and they're usually pretty competitive salaries. And the best thing that can happen is you learn a ton. You are on a skyrocketed career trajectory with all the hyper growth that these places usually have, and you get a payday. So
mm,
even the worst case scenario isn't that bad.
mm, mm. And when we had our kind of pre-chat, we were talking a little bit about kind of negotiating those contracts. So what's some kind of advice that you can give someone if they are looking at working at a startup, even just in terms of negotiating like your total package? Like what's some advice you would give someone?
Yes. So while equity can pay off, oftentimes it does not. So in our pre-chat, or afterwards, I got really curious. And so I went down a rabbit hole on the interwebs of, how many companies are actually IPOing still. And the
Mm,
stats for this year, pretty scary. So in 2021, about 1,000 plus companies went IPO, and in
okay.
2023, can you guess how many?
Whoa. I'm going to say 400.
That is a good guess. Now cut it in half.
What? 200?
Yeah, it was less than 200 companies went public in 2023.
Wow.
I also read that in TechCrunch, only 16% of companies get acquired. And so it's very easy, especially if you're young in your career, to be attracted to this elusive, shiny object called equity.
Mm,
But if
mm,
we look at the numbers, it's nowhere near a guarantee. It's
yeah.
always a gamble. And so while equity should be viewed more as a nice cherry on top, what I often see is, understandably so, people bought into their big payday being equity. So I always advise people to see that as an extra add-on bonus. If that amounts to something great, that's not a reason anyone should join a company. You should join because you believe in the leaders, or you're going to learn a ton from your peers, managers, you're obsessed with the product, you're really excited about the role, the
Mm,
pay is good.
mm,
Those are reasons you join a company. And yes, you should negotiate equity because it is a gamble, but if you're still getting paid, you shouldn't have to rely on that elusive, could be half empty promise of equity.
Yeah, and I think that's just the important thing, is that balance of the pay. The whole package, like holistically, is making sure that it's well balanced. So you mentioned that you're not very risk averse. So what's like the biggest risk that you've taken that's really paid off?
Every startup I joined is the biggest risk I take. However, I will caveat it, Talu, in that while it is a risk, you can think of it as a bet. And I'm essentially betting on myself, right? And I'm going to bet on myself. Yeah, 11 out of 10 times, because I know I'm going to work hard. By now I have the experience, and that, you're just at this point, I'm just kind of replicating what I've done and taking it from startup to startup. So the biggest risk is each startup I join. Yeah. So I've been very fortunate to join companies. Samsara is now publicly traded. I was the third rep at Spiff. They've recently been acquired by Salesforce, which is huge. But I've also joined startups that have not yet done either. It's not to say that they won't.
Yeah.
But, after 9-10 months, I couldn't figure out a way to make it work. And so this was a company called Lilt. So I chose to leave because, I wasn't making it work. It wasn't great for the company either. They're paying me this hefty salary, and I have a good friend and colleague who's still there. And I actually caught up with her the other night at dinner. She's been there 4 years. And I said, how did you figure this out? Like myself, the other reps, our manager are no longer there. And you were promoted from a BDR to an AE. Like, how did you figure it out? And she said, I think that was exactly it. You all came in with the SaaS playbook, expecting to run those plays. I had never done or seen that before. So I came in with a totally unique, different approach. It was kind of ignorance is bliss, and it's more of a services play. So while that didn't work out, again, it was just 1 year of my life, learned a ton, picked up, went to the next one. Next one was a winner.
And what are some of the tips that you have for leading in startups? Because it is a bit different to leading in like a big corporate engine. What are some of the tips that you would give for someone who's having to lead in sales in a startup?
Highly organized. So there's so much coming at you all the time in a startup, and they're infamous for not having processes, right? That's any company that's just starting. They are looking to you in leadership to establish these processes. And so you need to be hyper organized in everything that you do. So whether that's your meetings and your one-on-ones, do you have a running doc? Do you document what was talked about each meeting and the outcomes and the expectations and the action items needed to move those needles forward in each of those items? Are you tracking where your customer wins are coming from, your personas, the ARR attached? Are you tracking, the feature requests and the ARR attached to it, so that you can go to product and say, it's a very different story to go to product and say, we need this feature versus we need this feature because we've lost 3 deals now in 2 months that equate to $150,000. So you have to be super organized and analytical in sales, tying it back to a dollar amount.
And I think this reminds me a little bit of something we had in our pre-chat where we were talking about even how do you kind of get progression? How do you make sure that actually the stuff is happening? So like you said, like with the sales team, not with the sales team, like with the product team saying, okay, this is actually why we need this to happen because we are losing these deals. So I was kind of interested in kind of the progression that you've had through your career. What are some of the things that you've done to kind of get that progression?
To get the progression in the career or progress?
In the career.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So when you want to progress your career, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. I hate to sound cliche, especially in sales. A lot of us think that our numbers speak for themselves. If you think about your manager or your director or your VP, they're not sitting there thinking all day, okay, who can I promote? It's Meredith's turn to be promoted. It's Talu's chance to be promoted, they're thinking about 50 million other things. They've got product coming at them, marketing, growth, maybe they have board, investors, a CEO. Like, they don't see what we see, and we're just thinking about ourselves all day, right?
Yeah.
For sales.
Yeah.
Let's call a spade again. So you have to be very vocal about what you want. So work with your manager, and it's different to be vocal and demanding. You don't want to be demanding. So you want to go to your manager and say, Talu, I've thought about this for a while now. I'm very interested in management. And the reasons I'm interested in management are I'm already seen as a leader on the team. I've been performing for 4 quarters, 5 quarters now. I love helping our teammates, helping them with calls. And so I'd like to explore a path there. What do you think? Get their feedback. You also want to come with things that you can do to show that you are working on those skills. So one thing I always ask when promoting either BDRs or AEs up is, what have you done to prepare yourself for this role? So you want to show ahead of stepping into that role that you have those skills and that you've at least been working on them ahead of time. So I'm interested in management, and I know that you run the team meeting every week. Would it be helpful if I ran one from time to time, or if I, ran a separate meeting on Fridays for product training? Like, how can I help you? Things like that. Or can I lead a BDR training and show them some best practices for how to book more meetings? So you want to show them that you're thinking about the role ahead of actually having it.
And I'm really intrigued into that balance between vocal and demanding, and how do you strike that balance? Because that's a really tough balance.
Yes. So your weekly one-on-one should have a running doc on it. So when you have, and it should also be used to discuss things like career goals. So your weekly one-on-one should not just be pipeline review. If it is, that's step 1. You need to course correct the agendas and the objectives there. So you need to start talking in your one-on-ones. I'm ready for management. I'd like to explore it. How can I best prepare for that? You and your manager work on a plan. Each week you should have action items and takeaways that you'll be working on. And then the next week you'll share how you delivered them, what the results were, and have a new takeaway for the next week. So that way you can say, okay, if I do XYZ by October 1st, would that make you comfortable enough to put my name in the hat for that promotion?
Got it. And I think that's a really good way, because actually it's been building up over time. It's not just like a one day, this is what I want. It's kind of like we've been having these conversations over time. I'm consistently delivering, consistently doing the right things. So now it's not as much of a surprise.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. So sidebar conversation. Is there anything that I've not asked you that you think it would be good for me to ask you?
Ooh. I think if you were to ask me what I would do differently in my career, I don't know if there's anything I would do differently. However, there is something I haven't had the chance to do yet that I'm hoping I can. It's interesting because studies show that in a salesperson's career, especially in startups, that you make the most wealth by hopping jobs every 18 months to 2 years.
Okay.
And it's ironic because when you're interviewing candidates, you look for longevity in careers. However, a good hiring manager will take the time to ask, why did you leave, right? And there's so many things that can go on, right? Maybe there's layoffs, maybe you just had to relocate, maybe you were overpromised in the interview. I just so happen to have changed companies every 2 or 2+ years or so.
Okay.
And I'd love to be able to call a company home for a full 4 to 5 years, because I do believe you really hit your stride with more at-bats, right? It's like the 10,000 hour rule by Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And there's a reason there's a ramp period, right? There's a grace period with reps, with managers, with anyone, because it takes time to build these skills. And I've usually sought other opportunities right as I'm hitting my stride. And so I would love, and I would implore anyone listening to try to stay somewhere for 3-4 years. Now, I know it's not always possible. It hasn't been possible for me. Things are constantly changing, economy, companies, etc., especially in startups. But I think it'd be really cool to see something all the way through for 4 to 5 years, so that it almost comes as, muscle memory.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because I've actually only really worked at one company. I worked there for like 12 years, right? So I've had like almost like the opposite. But I think that, there is that thing of when you move, you get bigger pay jumps and different things like that. But if you have a company that like treats you well and does that for you, then why not stay? And I think it is that thing of, well, can you find that right fit? Can you find a company where, yes, I'm going to stay here for 4 or 5 years, but don't think that you can screw me by not paying me like market rate when I know I could go somewhere else and get it. So it's a really interesting balance.
Yeah, I'd love to see a study on that, because there are the studies that show that you make more money once you hop.
Yeah.
But I would also imagine you could probably make the same, maybe even more, by staying in the same role and just be really, really good at it.
It really depends. So I've had amazing managers who, like, I know you're not trying to screw me on money. So I know that they're going above and beyond, because normally companies have like, they have limits. So like if you're internal, you might get a 15% pay rise at most. If you're external, you come in with no reference, right? So I've had great managers who have fought for me to get above the odds. But I think that I've had probably a bit more of an exceptional career in that sense rather than the rule, because I think a lot of companies are just trying to like keep the cost low, right? And that's really where, like, actually, like, if they're not going to give you your money, go be somewhere else that will give you that money, because there are places that will give you the money.
Absolutely.
So just as we close, we do something called Tickfire questions, which is kind of like quick fire, but where more makes you tick. So Tickfire questions. So I'll ask you a few questions, and then you can just kind of give short answers to those. Are you up for that?
I'm up.
I'm up. Okay. What is the difference between a good leader and a great leader?
A good leader not only cares, but they show they care.
Cool. Thank you. And this is a special Tickfire question just for you. So you're someone who's generally been like a really high performer. What do you do when you're in a funk? How'd you get out of it?
So if I'm in a funk, I need fresh air. So I'll usually go for a very aggressive run. Sometimes that run turns into a solo dance party in my house or apartment or whatever. There's I went to a Tony Robbins seminar, and if any of your listeners have ever been, the first thing they do, and they have you do it hourly, is just move your body, and they have professional dancers come in and put you in dance groups. So if I'm ever in a funk, it's about changing the molecular energy and getting fresh air and moving the cells in my body.
That's awesome. What about if you're in like you're having a rough quarter? What would you do?
If I'm having a rough quarter, you just got to keep on keeping on. Things will pop. I've been there. My first quarter at Samsara, I was not going to hit. My VP said, I better see you in this chair 5 a.m. every morning making cold calls. That was terrible. I did just that 2 days before the quarter, got a PO, completely changed the trajectory of my career. So never give up. Keep putting in the inputs, and the results will follow.
I love that. I love that. What is the best advice that someone's given you about leadership?
The best advice someone's given me about leadership is to be more vulnerable and to empathize more.
I love that. And how has kind of vulnerability shown up for you? As a slightly not quite Tickfire question, but how's that vulnerability shown up for you?
Vulnerability shows up in sharing my why. So at the top of the call, you asked, what makes you tick? And the surface level answer was, I'm money motivated. I was hoping we could stop it there, but you did a great job peeling back the layers of the onion, and you asked a very vulnerable question. Okay, why are you money motivated?
Yeah.
And before leadership, I would, maybe say, well, I've got expensive taste, or like,
Okay.
girls gotta
Okay.
eat, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But the vulnerable answer is, and it's scary to be vulnerable. The vulnerable answer is, what I shared at the top of the call. I grew up
Yeah.
with a, sick mother, and I want to be able to care for myself if I'm ever in a similar situation. So it's crazy. It's amazing how if you start being vulnerable, how immediately, how quickly you'll see others reciprocate.
Because when you told me that, I felt so comfortable to share with you my experience as a child, and just like, yeah, and it got me thinking. I was kind of like, I was lost for words for a couple of seconds because I was just like thinking about it. I was like, wow, like just thinking back to that time. So it definitely works because you were vulnerable with me, I was vulnerable with you, and it just, yeah, it was great. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And then the last question is, if you could start your career again with what you knew now, what would you do?
Ooh, if I could start my career, shout out Andy Wilson, I would just stay under your management, piling up the champagne bottles, let them rip.
You'd live basically in a big house of champagne bottles. That's what you would do.
Pretty much, yes.
Meredith, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know it will help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If anyone wants to connect, Meredith Chandler on LinkedIn. I'm currently head of sales at PClub.io, or you can check me out at merediththesalescoach.com if you're looking for extra guidance on interview prep, building your company, or earning bigger commission checks.
Thanks so much, Meredith.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers, and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling, and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.